color correction is not necessarily only to find the color balance. It's sometimes also used for changing colors of products. So I worked for Monica Vinader on these images, and I'm going to explain why this is again something that the retoucher has to do. So we have here a nice bracelet, and they actually have lots of variation of this product. They have it silver plated, but they also have it in gold, and they also have it in rose gold. So already you have three different options, and on top of that you have the actual this part of the bracelet in different colors. So you have lots of variation. I think they have around, like, I don't know, like 21 or something like that amount of options for this bracelet. Now, instead of taking pictures of all of these, because they actually have the physical product, all of these variations, instead of taking pictures of all of them, they save cost and make it easier for the web profile of the website, I mean the company. They take one picture and then they ask the retoucher to create all these versions. They send references of the colors, and you have to, as a retoucher, make sure you match those colors from that original one image. The reason, it's not just because it's easier to do it just one image. The reason is mainly that once you are on the website, if you change the color, they want to make sure the image doesn't move, because it looks a bit unprofessional when you change colors and the product slightly looks different. Even if it's just moved slightly here, they want to avoid that. They want to make sure it looks exactly the same. So they sacrifice the reality a bit of the product, and they rely on the retoucher to make sure it's 100% the same color as the final product. So it's a very responsible role as a retoucher to make sure you can match those colors. Now, how do I match these colors? Again, using non-destructive editing, you can see that each of these color versions have their own layer groups. So let's say, once again, just to see the original color, we have, if I turn off everything, it's actually a black color. How do you call this? Strip? I don't know how to call this part. So that is actually black, which is, to be honest, one of the most difficult colors to turn into something that has colors. Unfortunately, when I joined, they already had this. This was the only image they had, and they thought a neutral color as black would be easy to turn into other colors. Well, I told them later that probably a gray version would be easier, or any other color would be actually easier than black. So I had a really difficult time turning this black bracelet into, let's say, red. But it's possible, luckily, because the image quality was really good. I could recover a lot of detail from that by using adjustment layers. And notice that each of these color versions I have in layer groups, and instead of using masks on each of these layers, I just use a mask on the layer group, and that affects all these adjustment layers within it. Okay, so you don't duplicate that mask. If I wanted to, I could even have all of these in a big group which says recoloring, and have only one mask on top of that. The advantage of that, if I go into these adjustment layers, you can see all of them will affect that detail and change the color of it. But if I feel like I accidentally affected a part of this plate here, which I can just quickly show you. If I use the brush tool, I start drawing over this. You see, all these adjustments now are affecting that part as well. But I'm just using the brush tool, drawing with black and white. I can very easily change that. So pressing X on the keyboard, I'm masking which areas I want all these adjustments to affect. Okay, masking and adjustment layers is a very simple but important technique to learn. If you're not familiar with that, make sure you look into masking and adjustment layers. Now, there's no rule really what adjustment layers will work best, but probably the most commonly used ones are levels, curves, and hue saturation. Almost everything you can achieve with this combination of these three. Sometimes you might need to use some additional ones as well, but these are the three most trusted adjustment layers. Now, here specifically, if you zoom a little bit closer to a detail, let's see what I managed to achieve with these. So first, I'm going to double click on this hue saturation and maybe put these properties here on the top, just so we can see this better. Okay, so that's the hue saturation. If I turn that on, you see I am using the colorize feature, and that's probably the heart of the whole adjustment, because that manages, if I don't have that, hue saturation can't do anything. But with colorize on, I can actually turn even a monochrome or a grayscale detail into colors by using a hue, which I selected here, and a saturation. So if I change the hue, you can see it can colorize it to any different colors. Okay, I think it was on 4, so let me just put it back on 4, like that. So that is probably the base of the whole thing. Then I had to make it brighter. For that I use curves. Curves is probably the best way to increase or decrease brightness, because every image will have a tonal range, and the tonal range goes from the darkest points to the brightest points. Now normally you don't want to change those, because if the brightest and darkest details change, that looks very bad. I mean, like the darkest details here, if I would increase the brightness of those, let me show you what happens. It washes out the image completely. Okay, you lose contrast. You don't want to do that, and that is why curves is an essential adjustment, because here you can create a curve, which means that the midtones will be changed. That's the middle line is the original tonal values. So you can see that anything goes above that gets brighter, anything that goes below that gets darker. So you can see the center part got much brighter, but the darkest details didn't move at all, and the brightest details didn't move at all, or hardly moved compared to the center bit. So you can create as unique curves as you want, but most of the times you only need like 2 or 3 points that you adjust on it until you get the final result, and you can see with and without how much big difference it makes. So it improves the colors there. Levels I use normally to increase the contrast. With this one you are actually cutting off some details, but with that you can actually assure that the contrast is increased. Now again, on my screen I can see it perfectly. On the projection it's not that visible, but it adds contrast. And then finally I had to also add a little bit of brightness on this with an additional layer, because I could see that products, when they were lit, they actually reflected much more light. So the brighter details had to be even brighter. So here I needed to use this combination of 4 adjustment layers to turn a black chord into a nice red color, and that exactly matched the product. So this is still what they have on their website if you look at it. And the same thing I just copied over, and I just mainly changed which adjustment layer do you think I had to change for changing the color after I established my adjustment layers? Yeah, the hue saturation. That's where the hue would be different, but slight adjustments on saturation and the others as well. Like here I didn't need the levels. So as always, like checking back and forth with the reference imagery and the actual product. So
just a question.
Yes.
So you said that each item has got a very specific colour.
Yeah.
And then they gave you the references for that colour.
Yeah.
So how did you translate that into the hue when you were colorizing it?
Just by
Was
eye.
it just by eye, or can you change
It wasn't printed image, it was also a digital image that I got from as a reference, and they said they rely on that image as a color. Again, we can say, or maybe on my screen that will look different, but the most important thing is to match to the reference they give you. So because it was a digital reference, I had it on the same computer side by side. So I was working on the image while I had the reference next to it, and I tried to match it as close as possible. It's probably not 100% the same color, but they were very happy with the colors, and they are really obviously colors are very important for this brand, so they were very strict about it, but they were happy at the end result. So I think you can rely on your eyes, especially if you train your eyes matching colors. First it might be difficult, or when you look at an image, like remember the Doctor Who image. I remember when I started retouching, when I looked at an image, I thought, oh, it actually looks fine, the colors. And then I started playing with it and I realized, oh, it was really blue or it was really red. Now I realize the more you do it, your eyes will get used to this and you will have points that you look at, like the skin. It always gives it away. You can rely on your eyes to, like, if you have skin in an image, that is always easy to spot if there's any color issues with that image. Now, that color correction is a huge topic, and I could talk about it all day. But let me switch to another example.
Just a quick question before you move on. For the different metal variants, you just do the same, just change the mask. The same process.
It's the same process, exactly. I can show you just quickly that. So if I go down there, you can see the original metal is gold, and then to turn it silver, that's a very simple one, hue saturation, and you just reduce the saturation down to -100. That's actually a very easy thing to do, to turn gold into silver. But then the other one is a little bit more tricky, the rose gold plated. That one you can see. Actually, that was also just hue saturation, but to find that hue and saturation, I had to really match the reference several times until I got it right. Again, that's also just one adjustment. It's a little bit more pinkish version of the gold, which is quite nice. I quite like that color. So yeah, the same thing, and I'm using another mask. By the way, if you want to check your masks, how they look, you can always alt-click on them. And you can see that I'm not even 100% tidy on this one. It doesn't have to be tidy. If it does the job, it's fine. Okay? Alt-clicking on the mask, you can always see how the mask actually looks like. White shows black eyes. That's always how it works. So wherever you see white on the mask, that's where it's in effect. Black when it's hidden or it's not in effect. Okay?
So, really quickly, when you do the mask, that I know you maybe what's the easiest way you find to do it? Because I find there's been so many changes and I've done it different ways over the years and I'm just trying to find out what's the easiest way you do it.
So in general, how do I do masking? That's the question. That's the next example actually. I'm going to go in more detail. So next one I would like to talk about is extract things from their background, where masking comes hardly into play. Now you can see again another Doctor Who character. I actually don't watch Doctor Who. I've never seen one episode. Shame on me. But you can see that again the original image and the final version. Now I worked as a designer in a company for licensing industry, which is always about movies, games, toys, all kinds of things like that. And licensing design means that you actually create a guide in which you use images that the company provides you, and then you spice it up and create cool graphics from it that can be used on posters and the products as well, which can easily be placed on like t-shirts and stuff. If you want to check out a company, my friends are working, they started this company 2 years ago. I used to work together with them. It's a Fractal with F. It's a very cool company, Fractal Creative or something like that. I'm sure you will be able to find them. They are the ones actually I working on Doctor Who together with them. So I do the retouching for them, and then they turn these into really cool designs, what you will see all over the place, wherever these images are used. So for them, obviously, not just color correction is important, but to separate the image from its original background. So although it's a white background, it's still a tricky job to do nicely. Okay, so it's a very nicely isolated white background. That's the image they provided me. Unfortunately, not a raw file in this case. But you can see when I open up the PSD file, you will see here what I have to provide my friends to continue working on is an image which has transparent background. So if I zoom closer, you can see the hair has to be really nicely retouched as well, and not just the hair, even like very minor details like here, the umbrella. Now these are obviously not easy to do. I mean, it has to be really closely checked, and even transparent details like the I don't know how it's called on the umbrella has to be made sure that whatever they put behind it, whatever color they use, it will look good. So there's always tests when I create different colors. Let's say I replace this with a different color. I'm just going to use color and replace it with red. And then I check how it looks on red. So make sure that there's no colors on the edge that will look odd or strange. Again, the hair is always very important. Now, the technique that I came up with and that I've been using all the time now is a combination of two techniques. You can see I have lots of layers here, and mainly the most important bit of my layer structure is how I do the separation of the body and the hair. Hair is always a tricky one, and I actually use both pixel mask and vector mask for my editing. So to make it simple, whenever you look at an image, you will always have sharp edges or hard edges, as they better refer to, and soft edges. Soft edges would be hair, fur, grass, anything that's very fine detail. And then you have the hard edges like clothes, skin, and things like the umbrella products. So again, there's obviously overlap, but I guess you get the point. So soft edges and hard edges should be dealt separately when you're doing masking. Hard edges, I found the best technique to do it is unfortunately a little bit time consuming, but it's still the best way to do it, is using the pen tool and creating a curve. And save that curve or path as a vector mask. So let me show you that. On this image, if I turn off everything, I'm just going to turn off all my layers, you can see that the whole body, apart from the hair, is masked out using a vector mask, which you can see here. If I use my selection tool, you can see that that path is going all along the edge, and that's how it's selected. Now this is manually placed anchor points. So some people would say that the pen tool is not necessary for Photoshop users. I would say if you want to get into retouching, it's a very essential tool, very important, because especially if you do product retouching, but even for like if you have to extract people from their background, I would say it's almost the most important tool. So pen tool is always going to be important to create very precise selections, because you can see the advantage of saving a vector mask that you created with the pen tool is that you can still move these points around. So if I use my direct selection tool, I can select any of these points and I can still move them around. Okay, any of these points can be moved around. Now, one of the techniques I came up with when I started doing things like this with the vector mask is that if I feel like there's maybe not too close, something like that, I made a selection and I zoom closer and I can still see a bit of the original white background. Instead of going in and changing things one by one, I just simply make a big selection with the white arrow tool, the direct selection tool, and then I use the arrow keys on the keyboard to shift them around. You see why I do that? And it's actually not a problem if you sacrifice 1 or 2 pixels of the edge. Just make sure that there's no white showing up. And because you already created the shape, it will look fine. So even if you go a little bit further, I say eat into the image itself, it's fine because it's a very high resolution in an image. A couple of pixels on the edge shouldn't be a problem. And you can see once you have that edge, it's very easy to move it around and slightly adjust it to make sure it perfectly matches. Now, of course, there's another way to deal with edge details. So let me just show you maybe another area. Let's say I have something here where I can see a little bit of white showing up, and let's say I have to make sure that this is actually not extracted, but it is part of the edge. You can also use an a separate layer, which I rename this layer to edge detail. And you can see this layer is already clipped onto the layer below it, the body layer. So edge detail is clipped onto it. How can you clip? Holding down Alt or Option, click between the two layers, and that is going to clip the layer on top onto the layer below it, which means whatever you draw on here will only be visible in the boundaries of the layer below it. So if I start drawing something here, let me just zoom back a little bit, it will obviously won't go outside of it, it will stay in whatever the mask reveals. So instead of using the brush tool and pick a color and then start drawing over that, that's obviously not the best way of doing it. I normally use the clone stamp tool or healing brush. So using the clone stamp tool, make sure for these tools always use sample all layers. If you use separate layers, so that's an empty layer, I won't be able to use current layer because there's nothing to sample from. I have to use all layers, so it samples from the layer below, but adds the retouching on the layer on top. So if I now alt click here, sample, and start drawing, you can see I can actually create the illusion of a perfect edge detail by just simply retouching from the skin, and I extended that detail. Okay, so there's another technique. If I turn it on and off, you can see there was the white bit. Now it looks like perfect edge. Okay, so it's a cheat again. As a retoucher, you have to keep on cheating, find ways how to cheat. Probably the best example of cheating is when you have to work with hair. I actually draw hair most of the time. So if the hair detail on the edges when I do the extraction is not good enough, I actually go in and draw one by one hair detail to make it look like it has that additional detail. I think I have an example for that from Tony and Guy. Let me just find that example here. I'm not 100% sure on this one. Actually, we have it on this one as well. But I don't want to jump ahead because I want to show you the hair on this Doctor Who image as well. So I will come back to this one. There's a lot of things here I had to change. But here I would like to show you that we have apart from the body, once you created that with the pen tool, you have the hair detail on a separate layer, and you will notice that there's a lot of white bits there as well, because the way the hair is created, and I'm going to turn off the body now, the hair I just separate onto another layer. It's the exact same layer but with a different mask. I actually use a vector mask to separate it from the body, and then I use a pixel mask for the separation from the background, and for that pixel mask I use color range. So I show you that quickly. I just delete that layer mask. So this is what I separated with the vector mask. Once that's done, by the way, shall I show you how to do the vector mask, or you guys know how to do that? Anyone who wants to see vector mask as well? Yeah, okay. Just quickly, in this case, it won't be perfect, but I will just do it quickly. So I delete the vector mask as well. So I need to separate the hair. I select the pen tool. P is the shortcut. Make sure you switch to path mode, and here on the top you make sure you choose combine shapes, that one. And then also there's an additional option called rubber band for the pen tool, which is good to have on. With the rubber band, you can actually see how your next curve will look like. If you don't have the rubber band on, you won't see this preview. You see, I don't see anything. It's a really hidden feature. Not many people know about it, but that's a very useful one. Another useful thing about the pen tool is when you created a new anchor point and you realize, oh, shit, it's not in the place where I wanted to place it, you can always hold down space to move it and still move it around. So space can reposition the point on the go while you are still editing it. So pressing space on and off while you are still holding down your mouse can adjust the anchor point while you are still creating it. Okay, so quickly create this here. I'm going to try to create a selection in which you can see I just simply click and try to select the details of the hair. Actually, I'm wrong because I just need to concentrate on the edge detail. I don't remember how much of the head we see, but normally here it's because this part of the hair is not important. That can always be added to the vector mask on the body. But the most important thing is the edge detail. So if I concentrate on that, that's how I created my path. And then all you need to do is hold down Command or Control on PC and click on the mask icon at the bottom. I hope you can see that. I call that the Japanese flag icon. If you Command or Control click on that, that created the vector mask. So you can see now there's the vector mask, and that's what I see. And after that, once I have that, I make sure I click on the image, so not the mask is selected, the image thumbnail is selected. And then I go to Layer, Color Range, and then I can click on the white background. That's what I would like to filter out. And the best thing to do with color range is to make sure the selection preview shows grayscale, so you can actually see what you are masking. And here usually in this preview I switch to image so I can see the image, but normally that's like a very small portion of the whole image, so it doesn't really help much. This is what's more important. I have the selection preview on grayscale, and then with the fuzziness I can decide whether I need to have more detail visible on the edge or less detail. So this is probably the best way of finding that detail that you need. And once you are happy with the result, you can click on OK, and then save this selection as a mask. That's just simply, again, clicking on the mask icon, the Japanese flag, without any control keys, just click it. If it creates the opposite, just press Command I or Control I, and then reverts the mask. Now, once again, you might see this problem on the edges there. That is, unfortunately, the edge detail sometimes gets pixelated. You just use the brush tool, set to black, and draw over the edges. Just that simple. If you have this problem ever, just simply draw over the edges like that. And then after you created this, that's where the real difficult bit comes in. Obviously, we can always put this together, and as I said, that middle bit there can be always added to the body. By the way, if you use a vector mask, you can use as many parts in the same vector mask as you want. So you see in this body shape, for example, this is a separate path, right? That's another separate path there. And there's also probably a couple of separate paths within there. So there's multiple paths, which means if I need, I don't always have to change this curve. I can also create another path using the vector mask and the pen tool together. I just make sure it says combine shapes, and then I can draw over that bit there, and you can see I can very quickly add that bit to the body layer, because that can also be part of the body. That's not the edge detail that I'm concerned about. And then once I have this, probably the next important thing is exactly the same what I did here on the skin. I would create another layer which is clipped onto this layer, and I just simply paint over the edges with the clone stamp tool. Again, not the brush tool, because if you just use a brown color, it will look like I don't know, like a mistake on the edges, not a flat color you just pick. You actually clone, or you can use the healing brush as well, and you see with that the edge detail, which still looks white, because obviously hair is really thin and it mixes with the background white, so you can't really filter out the white if it was shot in front of a white color. You have to still paint over it with the clone stamp tool. Just to show you how that worked, it's basically repeating what we did before. So there's that layer. I use my clone stamp tool, switching clone stamp tool. Always make sure you use a soft edge brush with clone stamp most of the time. By the way I change the brush size and the hardness is Control, Alt, and click and drag, right and left, up and down on Mac, or Control, Alt, right click on PC. And the same thing. So when I do this, all I do, Alt click, sample from the hair, and then start drawing over the edge. And it doesn't have to be like perfectly matched, because it's just a very minor detail on the edge. But you see, by using the colors from the actual hair detail on those pixelated details on the edge, you actually don't have to delete them. You just cheat and turn them into actual brown hair. Okay, it probably would be similar to this if it was not shot in front of a white background, but that's a very simple trick to do. And then there's also other details, like here I filled up the hair a little bit even more, and then there's also adjustments to the colors and so on and so forth. And look, there's a little bit of added hair at the end, which I draw in. I think this is not the final version. There was also another round where I had to add even more hair. But I will show you how to add hair if I have time for that. But let me just close this one. Okay, and do you have any questions about this? Yes?
In that situation, if you didn't have a white background, if you had to extract it from a cast shot,
Yeah.
how would you have made that initial selection? Because you wouldn't have been able to select white to be able to create the contrast, to create the mask.
So if you have some people in the background or some pattern or something like that, well, in that case, you would have to rely more on brushing in detail, because you would have to probably separate it with a more easier tool, like, let's say, quick selection tool, which would give you a much rougher detail, and then you would have to work much more on like faking the detail of the hair. Unfortunately, that is also the case sometimes. I actually have an example of that here as well. I will have an InDesign session, and in that one I show, I think it's here, out of bounds. Yeah, I need the PSD actually for this one. Yeah, so sometimes you have to work with images where the background is much more complex, like this one. If you need to extract her from the background, that's obviously much more difficult. But here I use exactly the same technique. You see, I have a vector mask. So if I turn that off, and then I have a pixel mask for the hair. Okay, but in these cases, you have to rely more on manual adjustments. So you have to really go in and do brushing if you need to, cloning over it. In this case, it wasn't necessary to do it so fine, so I just ended up having a rough version. But it would probably be not color correction, color range in that case, more quick selection as a rough first selection, and then refine that. But same thing, vector mask for hard edges, pixel mask for soft edges in hair most of the time. Okay.
Just quickly, the lady with the umbrella, how long did that take you to cut her out and complete her?
Yeah. It was probably around 4 or 5 hours altogether, everything. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it takes much longer, depending on the requirements. But I would say something with the complexity of that image is around 4 or 5 hours. If you get the routine, you know what you are doing, probably around that much. But it again depends on the client, and it depends on your experience. But for an image like that, you can easily charge up to £200 if you have the connections and the client who has the budget for it. So it's not a bad hour rate. If you get into retouching, it's a well-paid profession, and there's a reason for it, because there's so much things you have to learn. So let me just go back to retouching. Okay, I'm getting close to the end of the session. I should get into the questions and answers. I actually have 2 sessions for InDesign today. If maybe I will ask the organizers if it's possible, because I have 2 of the InDesign, one at 12 and one at full. Because I don't want to rush. There's so much else I would like to show. Are you guys interested maybe to have my 4 o'clock session, the InDesign one, turned into a continuation of this one? Would you be interested to come to that? Because I have InDesign twice. Because that I think I will be able to cover in 1 session. So instead of repeating that, maybe I can just continue the retouching in the last 4 o'clock session. How many of you are interested to come and continue from here? Okay.
Can I just ask?
Yes?
I'm here with the work colleagues, so we've had to split them out. So you see when I've been assigned that one to go to the InDesign one, like professional, but we can only do it, so I go to that at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
So, you see what I mean? I can't go to the 12 o'clock one. So you know, the organisers saying they'll all be available online.
Yes, we are recording it.
Last year they weren't put up online.
My ones will be definitely. I will put it on my website as well. Yeah, it will definitely be recorded. It will be on Academy Class somewhere, but if you don't find it there, it should be also available through my website. I shouldn't promote myself, so if you just look more Martin Perhiniak, you will find it. It will be on my blog as well. It's the same thing that is going for Academy Class. Okay, and if I do it for the 12 o'clock, would that work for you guys?
Yeah.
So swap that InDesign at 12.
Well, my colleagues go to that one, but I'm just thinking there might be other people who have found their schedule to go to that one at 4. Do you see what I mean?
Okay.
I don't know, like, whatever, but I'm just thinking.
Okay, well, it will be difficult to do it anyway, but because I have so many other examples. Yes? Yes. I guess we just have to probably use that 4 o'clock in the afternoon for continuing it, and then for you, if you can't attend it, it will definitely be recorded, so you will be able to check it out. Okay, so will that work for most of you? I saw, well, at least half of you would come for the 4 o'clock. And then if you want to see the InDesign, that's at 12. That's also a very useful one. If you use InDesign, the 12 o'clock one, I also collected lots of interesting things. So, let me just show you one more quick thing before we wrap up and get to the questions. And that's just the puppet warp, because that's something that people always tell me that Photoshop always comes up with these fancy new features and they are useless. And then I always say, yes, it might be useless if you're not creative enough to come up with ways of using it. Like puppet warp is typically one of those features most people think is just a gimmick. You might remember it came out with, I think, CS4 or CS5, something like that. And they always use the elephant with the trunk, and they move the trunk around. Why would you ever need to do that? I think they had another example as well, again, another stupid one. But to be honest, I find this a very useful adjustment. Again, another jewelry example here. Whenever they shoot this jewelry, there's a person who is in charge to make sure the shape is perfect of a necklace or a bracelet, anything like that. But they still manage to mess it up sometimes. And there's something where you still need to do some adjustments. Now, if you use Liquify on this, it will smudge the details slightly. So you can't really use Liquify on that. This is where the puppet warp can help. So there's the image itself. Let me just find that chain. Okay, there's the chain. By the way, it's two separate images. Don't ask why. They had to replace the chain, use a different image of the chain. I don't even want to go into that now, but let me just go to the edit menu and show you puppet warp. Puppet warp is actually creating a mesh, and it's a very, very smart thing. So don't underestimate these gimmicky features in Photoshop. It creates a mesh and almost treats the object as a 3D object, because you can create the points on it. They are called pinpoints, the areas which you need to move around. Okay, so for example, if I want to adjust this detail, I would put a lot of points there, and then I would also put a couple of points on the areas which I want to hold in place to make sure that these details are not moving around. Okay, so they are just there to keep them in place. And then I can, of course, always turn off the show mesh option. I don't really need to see the mesh. And then what I can do is now, moving these points around, I can adjust the chain perfectly without smudging any detail on it. Okay, so you can, it almost feels like going back and just improving that chain as if you were there on the photo shoot itself. So you can see a slight adjustment, but it's a very quick and easy way to fix things. And it's not just for chains. I use this for so many different things. You can even use it, and I might have time for this at the end of the day. You can even use it if you need to replace faces. Like this one is a face replacement, like the face of film. Again here, puppet warp I use to pinpoint the most crucial bits of the facial features, and moving those onto the original face, I could squeeze the guy's face, the other guy's face, in place. Let me just get rid of this puppet warp. So this person obviously looked a little bit different, you see, but to make sure it matches the other guy's face, I had to use the puppet warp. Let me zoom a little bit closer. And that moves the features in place, and that makes it believable that it's a replacement on the other guy's face. Now, don't ask me why it was necessary to do this, but again, this is something that you might come across, that you have several pictures of a model. I had this in fashion photography as well, and they like the posture on one, but they like the face on another, the facial expression. And let's say on one of the images, the model is smiling. They don't like that. They want the person to look moody. So you have to get the moody face and put it on the other body. It's possible you are asked to do things like that. So for that, I would use puppet warp, and it's a brilliant feature for that. So again, if you want to find out more about this and all the other stuff, hopefully we can continue from here at the end of the day around 4 o'clock.